There we go. So I am recording this for a couple people who asked that we record it. So first thing I want to kind of offer up is this is your time. Because it's your time, if you have questions, you need to ask them. This is no question is, I'm not going to say too dumb, but I mean, we know some questions are clearly, but the idea is we can take any sort of question and at least tie it into higher level thinking. Okay, so no worries. You have misunderstandings. This is our time to take care of this. I am going to show you this. So I put together just a couple of tips for studying. Can everybody see this all right?
Yeah.
All right, so that means you can hear me as well. So just a couple of things. And the fact that you guys are here shows me that you're already well past others in the sense like you're wanting to do well. So here's what I would say is let me pull this up here real quick. There we go. So make a plan and stick to it. And what I mean by that is, hey, I'm going to study during this time and make sure you set aside that time. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but in today's world, it's really easy to get distracted. Try to give yourself like 30-minute blocks of studying. And maybe you might study like 3 30-minute blocks over this weekend. You can come up with an hour and a half over the weekend and study. My suggestion is never study longer than 30 minutes, 30 minutes at a time, right? Now, that's not saying some people can probably get enough studying done in an hour. Some may take a little bit longer, but try to organize them in 30-minute blocks. Also, make sure you have read either the AMSCO or the Cliff Notes. Okay, both of those are on the page. I'll show you where they are exactly if you need to look at it, but make sure you've read at least one so that, again, you have an idea of what the big themes are. If I were to ask you, and I'm not asking for an answer here, but if I were to ask you, what does the time period from 1607 to 1741, I should know this. That's pretty pitiful. I don't know the exact dates. Hold on, let me check. It's driving me nuts. 1607 to 1754. There we go. What's that period about? And then I can begin to go, okay, I know it's about colonization. I know it's about the creation of a new sort of trading system between the mother country and the colony. I know there also is this sort of anglicizing or making the Americas more English. There's also kind of the waning of the Spanish and the growth of the English. I know there's the development of multiple colonies. So again, working your way through and asking yourself questions only is going to come if you first read. Next, read through and try to list specific evidence that supports the key concepts. So I'll show you where the key concepts are. We did them at the beginning of this period where I asked you to summarize the key concepts. So go back now to those key concepts. What specific evidence can I come up with that would help answer or support that key concept? Same thing with learning objectives. And we're going to kind of go through those today. But when we see the learning objectives, can you answer these questions? If you can go through and list, maybe not even write out an answer, but list some good specific evidence. Maybe I might even have my AMSCO text next to me as I'm doing this. I may even have the Cliff Notes next to me as I'm doing this. But can I come up with specific evidence that would help support these? Okay. And then the last thing here that I want to kind of make sure that we cover is try to make connections between proper nouns. And what I mean by that is I'm going to unshare here, and now I'm going to share. Let's see, make sure I'm on the right page. Share this. Okay. So this is just our last class. So this was from 9:30, right? So this is the last time we met. And this one is the one that has all the review materials. So again, when I talk about the key concepts, reading through these two key concepts, can you come up with specific political ways that the British colonies participate? Let me check that back. Can you come up with political ways that the colonies interacted with Great Britain? Can you come up with some social, some cultural, some economic exchanges? How did the colonies connect to Great Britain, right? I might also look at how did immigration patterns affect culture? So I could answer that. How did immigration patterns affect where people settled, where they competed with each other, dot, dot, dot. You get the idea. So when we talk about the learning targets, you can find the learning targets right here. So when I was talking about the cliff notes, here are your cliff notes. I've even included a period 2 summary here. So this is just like a really quick breakdown of the whole period, kind of to give you a good kind of context of the period. So you can find that there. And then these are kind of the review sheets. I've actually added this new one in here, and I'll talk about that in a second. Well, what if I don't know where the AMSCO readings are? Remember, all your key documents for period 2 are down below in resources. So here you have your AMSCO readings. Here's the Cliff Notes readings. Here's some general period, resources. These are just, these are things that just you need for the class. Let me get a drink here. So let me just ask general questions. Anything you got before we kind of move into this? Because again, I want this to be driven by you. What questions do you have? What do you need help making connections with? And I don't have the chat up, so give me a second here because I'm sure you guys are really scared to say things. Okay, nobody said anything in the chat.
I think I mainly need help with is like the Navigation Act and like just the stuff that we didn't go over class and we had to read, and I just couldn't really understand that.
Excellent. I can do that. So I'm just going to make a note so that we make sure we talk about it, the Navigation Acts. And with that, we'll talk about mercantilism. With that, how about we also talk about Indian resistance? Because those were like the 2 things that I wasn't able to get to. What else? What other topics do people want to hear?
I just want to know if there's going to be a particular focus on the test. Like, is there going to be more of one topic than the other?
Themes. Well, so again, what I can do is I can immediately go to the key concepts. Those are the things I must focus on. You know, what we don't get, I'm sure what you may be used to is in non-AP type history classes, they say this is specifically on the test. But the reality is we can't do that because you're not going to know exactly what's on the test. So with that in mind, let me show you here. Let me stop sharing. There we go. Let me share this. So with that in mind, I'm going to keep going back to these key concepts. You know, with that type of question of what are the key things I need to focus in on, it's these key concepts. How is AP going to develop questions that will ask me for my understanding in migration patterns? Where did people migrate to? What types of people migrated to the north, to the middle colonies, to the southern colonies? I'm on the Zoom right now. What do you need? To be in here for? Oh, well, come on in. I apologize. You can just, if you want to sit up over here, I actually got a live member here. So again, I would go back. The key concepts is where I go to really focus in on what it is I need to concentrate on. And the other thing I would go to is the learning targets. So I don't, and then really the last thing, and I'll put the link back up there, but you should have it, is these framework proper nouns. So this is what's going to drive your studying in my mind. So first of all, I have to know these terms. I have to know what chattel slavery is. And not only do I have to know what it is, I have to know why it's significant for this period. What helped cause the need for chattel slavery? What was an effect of chattel slavery? So that's kind of the approach I would take. Instead of thinking what is exactly on the test, I am going to prepare for what I think will be on the test. A lot of these things will fit together in the kind of the same themes. So let me go back to this. And I apologize. I know one of the big criticisms is I jump around a lot. But let me go back to this page here. Make sure I'm doing it right here. Share screen, share, active, inspire. There we go. So you should see. So we said themes and key concepts. We're definitely going to go over those. You just might want to join our Zoom. Themes and key concepts. All right. What other things do you want to have reviewed?
Can you talk about the immigrations and the movements?
Yep. So we'll say immigration and migration. Most definitely. Excellent. Anything else? All right. So as you come up with stuff, what I'll do is we'll get started on these. And then as you come up with stuff, we'll kind of add it to it. And the only reason I need to make a list is because if I don't make a list, I won't get to everything. So I want to make sure that we do get to everything. Okay. So with that in mind, we're going to talk a little bit about the Navigation Acts and Indian resistance. So let me stop sharing here. Unfortunately, it's just, I can't just switch tabs, which kills me. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to go back to here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up these cleanup slides. This will just kind of help us really quick. And what you might do is pull up your period 8 your period 2 proper nouns. And as we're kind of going over these, they are key terms. Type them in. Put in there what you think you need to put in there. Okay? So first thing we'll kind of talk about, and they're kind of out of order a little bit, but first thing I want to talk about is mercantilism. So when you look at this term, mercantilism, what does it look like? Like what word do you know that kind of maybe comes from or is in the same family as this term?
It kind of looks like merchant.
Exactly. It looks like merchant. And when we know merchants, immediately what big theme are we always going to? Starts with the T, ends in raid.
Trade?
There you go. Yes, trade. So mercantilism is a trade theory. We can see it also fits into the category of like economics, right? How societies build wealth. So this is a way that societies during this time period built their wealth. And what did they try to do? They tried to promote governmental regulation of a nation's economy for the purpose of empowering the state. What? Okay, I don't really know what that means, but it looks like governmental regulation always means like laws. So they promoted laws of a nation's economy, maybe for a nation's economy for the purpose of giving the state more power. Okay, it still doesn't tell us what it is, but let's look at this one. Creates wealth by achieving a positive balance of trade. Okay, so we definitely know mercantilism is something that's going to create wealth. That's important. That they want to have a positive balance. What does that really mean? If I go to this next one, this is what mercantilism is. This is a relationship between the mother country and its colony. So it's a system set up by the mother country. In this case, we talk about England. So England had more colonies than just the American colonies. Where else were there colonies outside of North America that were British?
Is it Africa?
There were some British colonies in Africa. Where else?
West Indies.
West Indies, most definitely. How about the second largest country in the world as far as population? Mahatma Gandhi.
India.
India. That was their biggest colony by far, even bigger than the Americans' colony, just because of sheer population, the ability to control them. The British could not control the Americans. But what the British could do, and we'll talk about this a lot more in the next period, Britain really tries to have like a hands-on. We're going to really focus. So in this case, when we're talking about mercantilism, it is a relationship between the mother country and the colony. The colony has to send all their resources to the mother country, and in return, then the mother country takes those raw resources, and then sends them back via like manufactured goods. So the raw materials go to the mother country, manufactured goods go back to the colony. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship between the two. One thing you don't see is that the colonies do not trade with each other. So we're not necessarily talking about the American colonies, but we're talking about like the American colonies and India are not allowed to trade, or the American colonies and the West Indies are not allowed to trade. So when we talk about mercantilism, it is a system set up to benefit the mother country. To go on, tenets are that just means kind of rules. So the rules, all soil used for mining or agriculture was, this is what This is what the colonies were having to supply. The raw materials, the work. They discouraged like foreign imports. So they would not allow French products into the English colonies. They wouldn't allow Dutch products in. So again, what is mercantilism? Mercantilism is this system, that sets up economic relationship between the colonies and the mother country. Now, what are those laws that we had talked about? And those laws are what we call the navigation acts. Whenever we see the term like acts, that's going to denote laws. So these are like the laws of navigation. And really what it says is it just gives Britain the law-making capability to control trade in the colonies. So right around 1660. So we're really talking as early as like 20 years after the founding of a lot of these colonies, Britain begins to kind of restrict, notice what it says, restrict colonial trade and increase British wealth. So the idea is that the British end up having like a positive balance. They're going to benefit more than the colonies are going to. Again, the whole idea is to try to enrich the mother country, and the Navigation Acts is the legal way that Britain tried to take advantage of the colonies. It required that the colonists only trade with Great Britain. And then you can see some additional stuff. These are just kind of examples. Vessels had to be operated by crews that were 3/4 English or colonial. No country could trade with the colonies except for English or colonial ships. The colonies could export certain products only to England. So you can see how they're kind of restricted. So to take a step back, it's the Navigation Acts that give legitimacy to the British government to create a mercantilist system. So let me open this up. Does that explain what Navigation Acts and mercantilism is?
Yes.
Good. Explain it back to me then. I didn't know he was going to do that. So just explain it back in your words. What is mercantilism?
Is it basically like do they connect with each other? Basically?
Most definitely. And who connects?
Okay.
I'm asking you, Phaedra, who connects?
The colonies and the motherland.
Exactly.
The
So it
mother
is a
country and the
relationship. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Say it again.
No, I was just saying it's the colonies and the mother country.
Most definitely. And just think of it like a relationship. And you think of the mother country as the parent and the colony as the child. And what we're going to see in the next period is you guys are going to be exactly like the colonies. You're 16, 17, 18 years old. You're kind of ready to go out on your own. You're still kind of held back by your mother, in this case, your parents or your family structure. You're ready to be independent. You're ready to take on this world. And you still have these kind of regulations that keep you in place, whether it's paying for your own stuff or, there's still certain things that hold you back from being truly free. In this case, the colonies cannot be free because of the laws that were put into place. Okay, so is everybody kind of good with mercantilism and navigation acts? Other questions you may have about
Yes.
that? All right. So let's talk about how did the Indians resist? So we know when the Spanish showed up, we know, of course, the Aztecs, the Incas, other native groups resisted. So we know that happened. How about North America? Where do we see some resistance? And we're going to see it in a couple of places, but it's really going to be like quickly. Oops, I don't know why that did that. It's going to be quickly. Why isn't that doing? There we go. Now we can see it. Hold on a second. Yes, ma'am. I am. Okay. So we see some evidence of Indian resistance, and that's all we look for, right? Do you have to be able to really explain it? Probably not. But if you can come up with the ways that the Indians resisted and kind of understand how they did it, then that helps you. But we can see there's something called the Pequot Wars. It was only a 2-year, really a 1-year kind of rising up. Now look where they lived. We can't really see this too well, but this is where these native Pequots live. And we can see Massachusetts, and we can see Connecticut right here in Rhode Island, and here's Long Island right here. So these Indians were native to this area. And you understand there's going to be pushback. You get all these European settlers coming into the Americas. They're going to land in the first available place. Well, of course, that place is going to be occupied by Indians. And of course, the Indians are going to fight back eventually, especially once we start to see where the colonists don't follow through on agreements that they make. What do we need to know? Not much. Just understand this is one example. Indian resistance. So it's the Pequot War. We can see, the whites attacked this Pequot village near the Mystic River. Whites set fire to their homes. They shot people who were running away, whether it's kids, women, or other male Indians. And then as a result, the Pequot tribe was virtually annihilated. So there was, how do you get rid of the Indians that are causing trouble? You don't kick them out, you just kill them. And this is one example where we see it. This was an Indian, and it just didn't come across as doesn't look very good. But what you could tell is this is kind of the center, and these are all bodies, dead bodies that are lined up. And so it's just kind of representing the total annihilation of that village. It's not a very good image, but who knows, you might see it. There's also something called King Philip's War. We'll also see this called Metacom's War. They're the same person. This is his Indian name. This is his name as given by the English or the colonists. So what we get here is simply, this did it again. What we get here is, I don't know why it cut all that off. Let me do this. There we go. You get this, an early form of native resistance where they tried to actually organize themselves. But remember, the biggest problem with the Native Americans is they had such animosity amongst the different tribes that they were very unwilling to work together. And of course, the white settlers took advantage of that. We're going to really see that in the next couple of periods, but we know that was a huge weakness of the Native Americans, and the settlers certainly took advantage of it. Basically, what we see, though, is that there were coordinated attacks along the white settlements throughout New England. Frontier settlements were forced to retreat back to more safe areas. And remember, this is also during the time of Bacon's Rebellion. What was Bacon's Rebellion about? And some of you on your proper noun sheet just said Bacon's Rebellion was a rebellion. Really? What's Bacon's Rebellion? Who was Bacon? Isn't it supposed to be what's like Bacon?
He was a servant.
Okay, so he actually led indentured servants. He himself was not one. So he happened to be like a landless, he's been described by a lot of different things, but Francis Bacon was labeled, he portrayed himself as being a lord, but he was a lord without land. So he starts to lead these indentured servants. Why are the indentured servants complaining? Why are they wanting to be led? Why are they angry?
Because they're not being treated right. Like they
Okay,
want to be treated
what are
differently.
they not getting that they were promised? Why am I on this page about Indian resistance and talking about Bacon's rebellion? So the indentured servants were given land at the end of their contract. They were given land on the edges, and this isn't a good map, but you can kind of get an idea. They were given land at the end of their contract on the edges of civilization. So as the Indians were kind of pushed more westward, then these indentured servants were given land again on Indian land now. And so what are you going to ask for? You're going to ask for protection. And so these indentured servants are asking for protection on the far edges of civilization. Protect us. We fulfilled our contract. Protect us now. And the governors of Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and New York do not send troops to protect them. And that's what causes the indentured servants to rise up and then go and eventually burn down Jamestown. So again, when we talk about connection, that's the key, is tying in multiple ideas, because everything connects. At some point, if I go back to this making connections, I can pull any single term and connect it with another term somehow. And you got to work on developing this type of ability, and it's tough. So, if I were to pull together Great Awakening, and what I literally do is I sit here and I pull the terms. Great Awakening. What term on the right can I tie to Great Awakening? I might pull in New England, because I know it happened along all the different colonies. Do I have any other colonies up here other than just New England? Here's Chesapeake. So I could say it also happened around the Chesapeake colonies. What was the Great Awakening about? It was a spiritual awakening. Oh, then I could pull in the term like Protestant, because that is a person who believes in Christianity but does not believe that the Pope and the Catholic Church are the center of the church. I could also pull in the Puritans, because they're a religious group. So again, I may not be able to get all of them, but I can certainly begin to kind of tie them together and make connections. So I would highly suggest, these are just a couple of what I thought were the key terms. But if you want to put additional ones on there, do. And just play this game. Atlantic economy. What could I put in with Atlantic economy?
The triangle trade.
Okay, certainly the triangle trade. What else?
Tobacco.
Tobacco, because we know that's one of the crops. Maybe cash crops. We could even put staple crops in there, because some people, and what's the difference between a cash crop and a staple crop? It's in the word, cash. Which one am I going to sell? Cash crops. Staple crops are what I need to survive, right? So we know, if I were again to kind of pull this out, staple crops were mostly grown in New England. Why? Because the soil was not good enough to have huge farms. I know that in the Chesapeake region, they mostly grew cash crops, like tobacco. A cash crop is a crop you grow to sell. So again, notice how I'm pulling these together. And when I pull them together, then I could even take the next step and try to write a sentence. But again, sometimes just playing the game of pulling these over and connecting them and figuring out a way that you can connect them, you might have to relook it up. You might have to, do a little bit of research. But I'm telling you, this is a great way that doesn't take a lot of mental effort to connect these different terms. And again, I just randomly took what I thought were like the top. I don't even know how many I have, 4, 8, 9. So I took about the top 17 here. There's more I could put in there. All right, so let me go back to this. So when we're talking about Indian resistance, here's another example. And again, Metacom and King Philip, they're the same person. One's his English name, one's his Indian name. What do we need to know? Indian resistance. That's really all I'm really worried about. The war ended, and here's kind of the biggie though. The war ends in failure for the Indians. We generally are not going to ever see it the other way. We're going to see some examples where Native Americans win a little bit, but we're not going to see. It's much better to err on the side that the Indians are going to lose than that they're going to win. I don't know if you're a betting person, but don't bet on the Native Americans winning. You can see what happened to Metacom. They beheaded him, and then they draw and quartered him. Does anybody know what that is?
Yes.
It's a horrific punishment. So not only did they cut his head off, but then to totally mutilate his body, what they do is they tie a rope around your wrists and around your ankles, tie each of those ropes to a horse, and the horse then pulls your body apart. That's a way that you tell a group of people, don't mess up or your ass is going to get drawn and quartered. Yeah, it's pretty effective. In medieval, I always love these kind of punishments because I wish we could do them in school, but they just wouldn't be appropriate, I suppose. But one of the other ones is impaling somebody. Impaling is where you take like a very long spear and you ram it up their rear end and then plant that spear in the ground. Those are very effective ways to get people to do things that you don't want them to do. Drawing, quartering, and impaling somebody. Okay, that's a positive take on today. But yeah, what do you see after King's Philip War? You know, if you want to talk about an effect of King's Philip War, Indians are never a threat in New England again. So that's pretty big. So if you're not putting that right now under your King Philip's War here, where do we see? Here's Pueblo Revolt, Metacom, King Indians War. So I'm going to immediately say it's like an Indian resistance. And then I'll put in the effect after King Philip's War, no more Indian resistance. And so that's kind of the other thing. And it'll take you guys a while to get this, but this should be open every single day in class. And as we work on these terms, because these terms all do come up, that's when you should fill it in. Then you don't have to worry about doing it all at the end. You're doing it as you go through class and you're learning those terms. Something to think about for next time if you did not do it. Last thing I just want to point out to you, here's the population of the New England colonies. So what do you notice? Yeah, you look at the Native Americans, the green line, that Native American line literally goes from 1620 to 1640. They lose approximately 80%. And I'm not good at math, so maybe we could say 75%, and they never recover. You look at the black population, a fairly steady rise, although very, very minuscule. We won't see like African slavery or African population in the colonies won't explode till after the 1750s and really after the Revolutionary War in particular. But what we do note here is notice white population continues to increase. So there's more and more settlers, less and less native people. And we could ask, the question becomes, what are the reasons why Native Americans? We know disease, but we also know violence. So something to think about. I can almost guarantee you're going to see some sort of question over like population and being able to have to explain why there's more of one group and why there's less of another. And I bet you can guess which way the question's going to go. Okay? Any more questions about, because I want to make sure that we're covering the stuff that you guys want to see. I'm going back to this here. So we've talked about the Native Americans. We've talked about the Navigation Acts, the Indian Resistance. We just talked a little bit about population, migration, and immigration, but I'll point out something here in just a second. But let's go to themes and concepts, key concepts. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to share. I'm going to go back to this screen. And let's go back to the first key concept. Maybe it's a little bit easier if I do this. I'm just going to copy this and we'll place it here. Okay. It's good. It looks like it's about 800. Get off of it. No, see, it's not going to let me. Okay. So let's just go back here. So let's look at the first one. And let's just think about specific evidence we can come up with. So Europeans developed a variety of colonization and migration patterns influenced by different imperial goals, cultures, and the varied North American environments where they settled. And they competed with each other and the Americans for resources. All right, so let's kind of break this down first and foremost. What do we know about the colonization? What do we know about the colonies? What do we know when we talk about American colonies? Where in Europe do the people tend to come from?
England.
England or Great Britain. Either is okay. England's fine too. So we know, at least in North America, that the majority of the migrants are English. So can it naturally be assumed that they're going to bring their culture with them? I would say the answer is yes. They're going to bring their religion. They're going to bring their language. They're going to bring the foods that they like to eat. They're going to bring the animals that they're accustomed to working with. They're going to bring their clothing styles, their architectural styles. So when we talk about how people how they migrated, remember, you bring everything with you. When people move to another country, they do not just leave everything they know behind. They bring as much as they can with them. And not only physical things, but like non-physical things. All right, so let's go back here. How about the French? So let's compare the French and the English. The English tended to come over individually or in family groups. That's a question.
Family groups.
So the English tended to come over in family groups. We know there is one exception. Which colony did mostly males come over to because they were looking for gold? Starts with a V.
I forgot what it's called. Oh,
Virginia?
Virginia. Remember, the first settlers going over there were thinking, we're going to get gold. But the reality was there wasn't any gold in Virginia. And why did they think they were going to get gold? Because they had heard about what the Spanish were finding down in Mexico. So there's a big difference, right? So they're hearing about this, all these huge treasure ships. They want a piece of it. So the early pilgrims, they're going to Jamestown. They're looking for gold. They're not finding any gold. So they got to turn to tobacco. So we know that's a biggie. But again, so the English come over in family groups, except for those that went to Virginia initially. What do we know about the French? How did they come over? Did they come over in individuals or as family groups? Individuals or family groups?
individuals.
Individuals is 100% correct. So we have two different kind of mentalities. And so when you see something like imperial goals here, there's just a difference. England wanted to set up new, like an extension of English society. The French were coming over strictly for economic reasons, strictly to find fur, strictly to develop economic relationships with the Indians. And so they came over basically as just individuals, as males. And so we see with the French are much better at integrating with the Native Americans than the English. The English saw the Native Americans as a threat. The French see the Native Americans as kind of an ally. And this is going to take us right into the beginning of next period where the English and the French are going to fight. And the French are going to have many more French or Indian allies than the British do. So there's a big difference between those two, and make sure you understand the differences between the English and the French. And what I might do is you might go back to some previous classes. I want to say like our first class that we started talking about period 2, we actually talked about the differences between those two. Let's see. I think we've kind of covered enough there. Let's look at key concept 2. The British colonies participated in political, social, cultural, and economic exchanges with Great Britain that encouraged both stronger bonds with Britain and resistance to British controls or Britain's controls. So let's break these down. In what ways were the colonists, like, how did they exchange with Great Britain politically? When we talk about political, we're talking about government. So how were the colonies interacting with the British by means of political means? Let me re-ask that question. So politics, or whenever we see political, it means government. So let me ask this, were the British colonies similar to the British government and how they ran it? Could you make that assumption?
Yeah, like with royal colonies and stuff.
Most definitely. Yeah, an example. That's specific. That is a specific piece of evidence. Excellent. That they set up royal colonies. These colonies were run by the royal family. We know, for example, the Carolinas were very strongly tied to the royal government, to the king. But we also know what was developed in Virginia. Remember, 1619 had 3 important aspects to it. That was the first time that the Virginians started. That was the first. What do you need? Yeah, I can't. Thank you, though. That was the first time that the Virginians started using tobacco. That's also the same time we see the first Africans coming to North America. And then what was the third thing that was established in 1619? The House of Burgesses was established. Remember, the House of Burgesses was the first democratic assembly in the Americas. So it's the first time that people in the Americas chose their leaders to run kind of the day-to-day running of Virginia. So the House of Burgesses, that is similar to what the House of Commons in Great Britain. And you're like, well, I don't know that. Well, just understand they use the same political ideas, right? Basic democracy. And that's going to be one of the big arguments as we move forward is no taxation without representation. That's going to be the big political thing moving in the next one. How about socially? How did the British share? I mean, we've talked about this already, but socially and culturally, how did the colonies kind of share or exchange with Great Britain? Well, we know they brought over all their beliefs. They brought, their language, their culture, their food stuffs. We know that. So that's how the British colonies were so closely tied to Great Britain. We're not worried so much about the resistance because we'll start talking about that next period. So I wouldn't necessarily pay attention to that. But, and then we have economics. So this would be mercantilism. This would be the Navigation Acts. We could also put the Navigation Acts in political. Okay, so again, I try to look for specific examples. The other thing I would say we need to kind of pay attention to are the learning targets. So I do have so these are right here. So you should be able to go through and be able to answer these. And they go through each of the different things that we had talked about, right? So for example, what's the context for colonization? Why does North America get colonized? I'm asking anybody. Why does North America get colonized?
Because the Puritans were escaping persecution.
So that would be one very specific example. Excellent. So we could say part of it was the Puritans. Are the Puritans and the Pilgrims the same?
No.
No, they are not. So they're both upset with Great Britain because they're limiting freedom of religion, but they both have kind of different ideas about their Christianity. So excellent. What else? Why was North America colonized?
Maybe to like find things to exchange with like other colonists.
Excellent. You know, when I don't know the answer, I'm always thinking economics and trade. I'm always going to that as an answer because you can fashion something about wanting to exchange products, right? And then being specific about what is to be exchanged, whether it's
Could you also argue that it was because competition between the European countries?
most definitely. That's excellent. So the Spanish were the first to do it. You think England's going to sit back and go, "Oh, we're going to let them have all the gold"? Hell no. The French see that. Oh, because the rumors about these huge gold, these treasure ships going back from, you know, Montezuma's treasures, they create this huge worldwide buzz. Everybody wants to get a piece of North and Central America and South America. So 100%. So we've just come up with three means. Nobody even mentioned Christopher Columbus. The fact that he discovered this brand new continent or continents, that's context for colonization because it was not colonized before because Christopher Columbus had not discovered it before. So again, you could go all the way back. Context is just not the immediate. There are bigger, longer lasting reasons. Let's look at 2.2. Explain how and why various European colonies developed and expanded from 1607 to 1754. So let's focus in here. How did the colonies develop? So immediately I'm going to think in terms of geography first. So we have specifically three general areas that we got to make sure we pay attention to. The New England colonies, the Chesapeake, but the Chesapeake's kind of weird because it's kind of that mix between middle and southern. So you can always talk about Chesapeake, but if you just want to stick with New England, middle, and southern colonies, I'm good with that. And if you want to include Chesapeake in the middle or southern, that's fine. But so if we just pick one, how did the New England colonies develop? So you'd probably come out with Puritans. You might come out with small farms. How did they create wealth? Through shipping, through small manufacturing. So keep in mind, and I know that's the first couple of classes of this particular period, so you might want to go back to those. Keep in mind what each colony kind of why or how it developed, and that will really help you. Overall, they all expand. Overall, they all have a very developed relationship with Great Britain because of the Navigation Acts, because of mercantilism. They begin to expand and seek more and more resources. So that's important for us to know. Anything else on 2.2? Anybody want to add?
Mr. Megashark,
Yes.
would you say that the Columbian Exchange goes well with all this?
I would say the Columbian Exchange would help to explain the context, most definitely. But I could also say Columbian Exchange was the foundation as to how these colonies begin to develop because the North American colonies had resources that Europe didn't. Right? Notice how I kind of threw that little explanation in the end, right? So the North American colonies develop because of European desire for the resources they didn't naturally have. I know I said it a little bit differently, but it's the same idea. So that's what you want to focus in on. Nice job. I'm thinking that ties in. Explain how and why environmental or other factors shape the development and expansion of various. So we've already talked about that with 2.2. We know that, you can't have plantations in the Northeast because there's not enough land that's available for cultivation. Where you find that, though, is in the South. So plantations naturally grow in the South. But we also know in the middle colonies, they grew wheat and corn. They had large areas, but notice the difference. The South relies upon slave labor, whereas the middle colonies, because they come over as family groups, because they come over in much greater population, they don't need slavery as much as the South does. There's still slaves in Pennsylvania, I think, up until the 1820s. There's still slaves in New York up until the 1840s. So the North doesn't completely get rid of slaves, but they certainly discourage it. So that's how I might answer it. Somebody want to say something?
Couldn't you say that also the animals,
Most
because they
definitely.
weren't used to having them?
Who's they?
The Europeans.
So it's the Europeans that had cows, pigs, chickens, sheep. It was the North American, especially the Native Americans, that did not have them. But once they get over to the Americas, they just, their population grows tremendously, mostly because there's no natural predators. So that's one thing to think about. But again, that's something you could argue. If we look at explain the causes and effects of transatlantic trade over time. So we know this is because it's an over time, it's a change over time question. So you need to make sure you're talking about things that develop over time. But if we look at causes and effects of the trade, again, that ties into 2.2 and 2.3. None of these, if you'll notice, are in isolation. Each one kind of takes a little bit from the previous one and takes it in a little bit of a different direction. But if we're talking about the transatlantic trade, we're talking about the trade that occurs, guess what? In the Atlantic. And what is that trade? Another thing we could come up with would be triangular trade. And if you remember, triangular trade was where slaves were purchased in Africa. They were sent to the Americas, specifically the Caribbean, where they were exchanged for raw materials, which were then sent to Europe. And those raw materials then were refashioned into manufactured goods, which were then sold to the Africans for slaves. That's the triangle, right? So make sure you understand how that ties together. Go ahead.
I mean, let's say that one ship went down because of a bad storm, that would affect them, economically. And I mean, the chances of them actually reaching land were kind of slim, because
I would say early on, yes. But once they figured out the route, the chances of losing a ship become less and less, especially if you watch the slave ship video that we watched in class, where you note that just the sheer volume, they couldn't get 5 million Africans from Africa to the Americas in one ship. So we know it takes multiple ships. Yes, there are times when the ships go down, but because the volume's so great, they're able to overcome that. But I think you make a good point. That certainly was something that they worried about early on. As we move on, interactions between various nations and American Indians, how that changed over time, we know that it became more and more violent. Initially, it was very friendly. It becomes more and more violent. Why? What do the
because of the demand
of what?
Of labor.
Not only labor. What did the Indians have that the settlers didn't?
Land.
So in the end, it all comes over not necessarily labor, but land. Yeah, remember, they overcome the labor issue through indentured servants and slaves eventually. All right, so we look at the next one. Explain the causes and effects of slavery in the various British colonial regions. So we know some areas did not encourage it and some areas did. We know the North did not need slaves as much as the South did. So you're just thinking of kind of why colonies began to embrace slavery and why colonies ultimately move away from slavery. And it comes down to population. Remember, in the North, they tend to come over in family groups. Remember Ben Franklin's family, he's one of 17 kids. So they're having tons of kids. You don't necessarily need slaves if you're making your workforce. So we
was it New England? The
Go ahead.
one that wasn't New England had a law against the slavery. So,
Eventually,
like
eventually.
have this.
We certainly see Massachusetts is going to be the first state, and that's not till like the 1770s that we see Massachusetts officially outlaw slavery. But they also put in like grandfather clauses where if you own the slave, you just can't buy any new slaves. But if you have a slave, you can still own that slave till that slave dies or you free them. So that's kind of a grandfather clause there. Um, but yeah, we just know each colony, and you better be able to identify which colonies tended to have more slaves and which ones had less. So, which colonies had the most slaves?
Southern.
Let's be specific.
The Carolinas.
So, North and South Carolina, one other state.
Virginia?
Virginia?
Virginia, most definitely. Georgia comes in later, but those are the three biggies, right? So Virginia, South, and North Carolina. In particular, South Carolina, towards this, once we get near the Civil War, we're talking about South Carolina had upwards of 7 times as many slaves than free people. And I'm even talking free people being whites. So the slave population way outnumbered the non-slave population. But that's not till the next period. We know, how did enslaved people respond to slavery? What I will say is that we're going to deal more about this in next period, but what I would say is just be aware of there was not a lot that they could do. We do know examples of free people. And if you remember when we talked about Anthony Johnson and Tony Longo, those were two people who were very active in their communities, but when indentured servants, the idea of indentured servants began to fade, African Americans were then they sort of leave the historical record. So I wouldn't worry so much about 2-6. You'll note that we didn't really talk about it at all in class. These are two that I'll kind of push off till next period, but just remember some of the basic ideas of slavery. What I think is more important is we look at like 2.7 in particular, explain how and why the movement of people and ideas across the Atlantic contributed to the development of American culture over time. This is very similar to 2.2. So again, how did these people coming over, how did they change the colonies? And again, as more and more people start to move over, they keep bringing all their ideas, their religion, and so we start getting a much more diverse population. And it may not be diverse ethnically, but it certainly is diverse intellectually. It is diverse with like people's skills. It is diverse with religion. It is diverse with attitudes towards how government should be run. That's kind of what we're talking about, and not necessarily the fact that it's just all white people. There's a lot of diversity within that. We'll kind of skip that and then just be able to, at the end, compare the effects of the development of colonial regions of North America. So this is kind of ties it all back together then. What can you compare the different regions of North America? I'll tell you the categories we're really heavily looking at for the test. So, because Mr. Wong kind of write our tests together, we're going to have different tests, but we tend to write them together. Focus in on the difference between English and French colonies, focusing specifically on English colonies, specifically on the American 13 colonies, know the differences between the colonies. Make sure you review the Great Awakening and the importance and significance of the Great Awakening. Make sure you identify, let me pull up my sheet here. I won't show it to you because I know you guys don't want to see that. But let's see. That's under recent. There it is.
Mr. Meganshar.
Yes, go.
Would you say that, like, okay, so like, you know how the slaves were first, like, they were imprisoned because like crimes they did, and then they got brought over from slaves. How did they, like, what happened for them to be like, did they just like come in and forcibly take them after they, or like, was it still,
How were Africans originally captured? Is that what you're asking?
yeah,
So, as we had talked about, there were some very strong African civilizations, specifically like the Benins. There were some other ethnic groups. They are the ones who controlled kind of the coastline, and they became very wealthy because they're able to trade with other groups like Europeans. As the Europeans need more slaves, remember initially slaves were just people who were debtors who owed money. Slaves were prisoners. Slaves were people that were gotten during conflict. But once the Europeans come and start wanting more and more slaves, then those big African kingdoms go more into the interior, mostly into what is present day the Congo, and literally would go and wipe out whole villages, like literally grab everybody in the village and take them. Or they would just go into a village and just take the men. And so, of course, we see as a consequence, Africa for a couple of generations has a clear difference between male and female population totals. Did that answer your question?
yeah.
Okay. Sometimes I ramble. Well, mostly I ramble. So I try to remember to go back. Other questions you guys have? At this point, if you want to head off, feel free. You didn't have to stay the whole time. If you want to head off, you got other things to do, that's fine. I don't have a problem with keeping this open and answering specific questions.
I have a question.
Go
So
for it.
let's say, like, for when it says, hang on, let me find it. So, like 2.6, and we have like a short answer that we need to answer on the test.
Uh-huh.
Like, should we bring in like stuff that happened after this time period, like the Civil War? Like,
I
the
would
North
avoid
didn't
that.
like. Okay.
And it's okay to bring in stuff that happened before, but the way now eventually, yes, but think about this is as we are moving forward along the timeline, you can use stuff that happens before. Occasionally it's okay to use stuff that happens that haven't happened yet, but the reality is try to stick within period 2. That would be
Okay. Thank
my
you.
main argument to you. Stay within period 2, especially when you're writing. Now, you may
Okay.
get an occasional question, a multiple choice question that asks you something that happened like after. I think I took all those out, but you might in an SAQ where it says, describe or compare the Spanish and English colonial models. So we clearly know Spanish. We studied that in period 1. So that's where you might pull something like that from. Does that help?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
Can you also go over what is it? How you say it? Tribalization.
Say that again. The door was closing as you were saying that.
Can you also go over tribalization?
Tribalization?
Yes.
Oh, like tribalization right down there. Okay. So tribalization has a couple of meanings. If we call somebody tribal, what does that mean?
Native or like?
So it certainly has a denotation towards Native Americans, right? When we think of tribes, we think of Native Americans. You might think of Africans. You might think of like South Asian Indians. So we certainly know what a tribe is. But when we tribalize, what that means is you become very kind of insular within your own group. So we could say like, as this class moves on, we will start to tribalize kind of the AP interdisc. We'll start competing against Mr. Wong's APUSH. And so we'll be a tribe ourselves. There'll be APUSH interdisc versus Mr. Wong's APUSH, and we'll compete against them. So we'll kind of become tribalized. So it kind of means like becoming much more closely aligned with your group. So if we're talking about colonies, we know that, like, for example, the Puritans were very tribalized. They did not like outsiders. We know the Pilgrims, they're a little bit more forthcoming in allowing others in, but they were tribalized. So we start to see each colony becomes kind of its own idea, its own kind of personality. You know, if I'm from Massachusetts, then I'm a Massachusettsian. I don't even know what they call themselves. Bostonian, I guess. If I'm from Indiana, I'm a Hoosier, right? That's kind of being tribal. I'm identifying with a smaller group. Does that help?
Yes.
You're just probably saying yes just to shut me up. So I get that.
No, I got it.
What else? All right. I think be, you know, be patient with your studying. Don't try to get it all done at once. Knock it out in like little small blocks. And studying also means, you know, me just taking terms like this on our framework proper nouns. If I'm just reworking them or rewriting them, that's still studying. So include that in your 30-minute block. Anytime you're interacting with the material, that's considered studying. So don't just feel like, oh, studying means I have to like review. No, it doesn't. It means working with the material. And so work with it. Again, I would say go back to that making connections and pull stuff together. Work with somebody. You and somebody else are on the same screen, and you know, we'll together work on it. How can we tie indentured servants and cash crops together? And it's going to make you have to work with the terms. The more you can work with somebody and come to an understanding together, the better off you'll be. So I cannot suggest enough working and studying with somebody. All right. Any last questions? I appreciate you guys staying on as long as you have. If you have questions, send it to me in Canvas inbox. I'll be checking that over the weekend. You can also send me questions via Remind if you want as well. Yeah, I think you guys will do fine. All right. So take care. If you need anything, let me know.
Bye.
See ya. Thanks for coming.